What if I told you that the government you grew up trusting, the one that promised to protect you, to serve you, to stand between you and the darkness, once sat in a room, looked at a list of 10,000 dead Americans, and called it a deterrent strategy? What if I told you that wasn't the worst thing they did that week? You'd probably think conspiracy theory, something your paranoid uncle forwarded at 2 a.m., something with bad fonts and red circles. But here's the thing that should keep you up tonight. Every single story in this documentary is documented, declassified, verified by congressional investigations, FOIA requests, and the confessions of the people who did it. This isn't the history they taught you in school. This is the history they buried. My name isn't important. What's important is that you sit down, dim the lights, and prepare to spend the next few hours learning what your government did in the shadows, what they did to their own people, to foreign nations, to democracy itself, and hoped you'd never find out. Some of these documents spent 50 years locked in vaults. Some were ordered destroyed. Some only survived because someone forgot to shred them. Others survived because one person, one terrified, principled, often destroyed person, decided that the truth mattered more than their career, more than their freedom, sometimes more than their life. We're going to tell their stories too. 101 facts, 10 chapters, a timeline of betrayal that starts before most of your grandparents were born and doesn't end today, because some of these programs, modified and renamed and better hidden, are still running. Get comfortable. This is going to take a while, and it's going to be worth it. Let's start with something that should be impossible, an act so brazen, so cynical, so nakedly murderous that even today, even knowing what we know about the government, it reads like fiction. It's 1926. Prohibition is 5 years old and going about as well as you'd expect. Millions of Americans are still drinking because, of course, they are. The Volstead Act didn't eliminate the desire for alcohol. It just handed the industry to organized crime and created a nation of casual lawbreakers. The government is frustrated. Their moral crusade is failing. Law enforcement is overwhelmed. And somewhere in the bowels of the Treasury Department, someone has an idea. What if we made the alcohol more dangerous? Here's the thing you need to understand about industrial alcohol during Prohibition. Legal manufacturers were required to add denaturants, toxic chemicals that made the alcohol undrinkable, to prevent bootleggers from redistilling it into consumable liquor. It was already poisoned. Standard denaturants included methanol, kerosene, and gasoline. But bootleggers were resourceful. They'd found ways to filter out enough of the poison to make the product merely dangerous rather than immediately lethal. People got sick. Some went blind. But most survived. So the government's response, and this is in official memos, people, was to make the poison worse. They ordered manufacturers to add even more toxic compounds: mercury, arsenic, formaldehyde, chloroform. The explicit goal, stated plainly in Treasury Department documents, it was to make the alcohol so toxic that people would stop drinking. What actually happened? People kept drinking, and people kept dying. Charles Norris, the chief medical examiner of New York City, was furious. He was watching bodies come in, that had died from government-mandated poison and watching politicians call it a deterrent strategy. He went to the press. He called it murder. He said, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly, "The government has taken on the role of poisoner-in-chief." His warnings were ignored. By Christmas Eve of 1926, 60 people died in New York City alone from toxic alcohol. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed, hospitals filled with the blind, the paralyzed, the dying. By the time Prohibition ended in 1933, an estimated 10,000 Americans had been killed by government-mandated poison in the alcohol supply. 10,000 people killed by their own government on purpose, and the official response was they knew the risks. This is where we begin, not because it's the darkest chapter. It isn't, but because it establishes the principle that will echo through every story in this documentary. The principle is this: the government will sacrifice its own citizens when it believes the cause is worth it, when it decides that a policy goal outweighs individual lives, when it concludes that you are acceptable collateral damage in someone else's war. And they will not tell you. They will not ask permission. They will not apologize, not until they're forced to, and sometimes not even then. Welcome to the Dark Files. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, Macon County, Alabama, 1932. The Great Depression has been grinding America for 3 years. In rural Alabama, it isn't just an economic crisis, it's a slow-motion catastrophe. Black sharecroppers in Macon County earn almost nothing. Medical care is a luxury. Trust in institutions, when it exists at all, is fragile, built on a foundation of centuries of betrayal. Into this landscape walks the United States Public Health Service. They arrive offering something desperately needed: free medical care. They call it the Bad Blood Program. Free treatment for bad blood, a term in local use for a range of ailments, including syphilis, anemia, and general fatigue. There are meals. There are transportation costs covered. There is a burial insurance policy for those who participate. For men who have nothing. This seems like extraordinary generosity. There are 399 black men with syphilis. There are 201 more without it, enrolled as a control group. And here's what the men are never told. They have syphilis. The government knows. The doctors know. From day one, from the very first examination, the Public Health Service knows exactly what these men have. They know syphilis is ravaging their bodies, attacking their hearts, their nervous systems, their brains, and they have decided, in discussions that are documented, in memos that survive in the National Archives, not to tell them. The original study was designed to last 8 months. It lasted 40 years. The logic, such as it was, went like this. Syphilis had been studied in white populations in Europe. There was a hypothesis, framed in the explicit language of scientific racism that pervaded medicine at the time, that syphilis might progress differently in black men than in white men, that it might affect the cardiovascular system more than the neurological system. The only way to test this hypothesis, the researchers concluded, was to watch the disease progress untreated. The word untreated is doing enormous work in that sentence. Let's be precise about what it means. It means that when a man named Henry Lax came to the clinic with chest pains so severe he couldn't breathe, pains directly caused by syphilitic damage to his aorta, doctors gave him aspirin and sent him home. It means that when another man began experiencing the neurological deterioration that marks late-stage neurosyphilis, the confusion, the mood changes, the creeping loss of self, his family was told he had bad blood and to bring him back for his next scheduled appointment. It means that when penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis in 1947, a cure so effective it could stop the disease's progression even at late stages, the Public Health Service quietly, deliberately, systematically ensured that the men in Macon County did not receive it. This is the part that should stop you cold. 1947. The cure exists. It costs almost nothing. A single injection, and a man's disease stops destroying him. And the Public Health Service knew, because they were the Public Health Service, and they withheld it. They withheld it for 25 more years. They also did something that has received less attention, but is equally monstrous. They actively intervened to prevent the men from receiving treatment elsewhere. When the military began drafting men during World War II, some of the Tuskegee subjects received draft notices that required them to present for a physical examination, an examination that would have revealed their syphilis and resulted in treatment. The Public Health Service contacted local draft boards and had the men exempted from service, not out of concern for their welfare, out of concern that treatment would contaminate the study. When organizations like the Julius Rosenwald Fund, which had been quietly funding black healthcare in the South, began offering penicillin in the region, the researchers maneuvered to ensure their subjects were excluded. They were protected from the cure. By the time a young researcher named Peter Buxton leaked the study to journalist Jean Heller in 1972, 28 of the men had died directly from syphilis. 100 more had died from syphilis-related complications. 40 wives had been infected. 19 children had been born with congenital syphilis. The story broke on July 25, 1972. The headline in the Associated Press read, "Syphilis victims in U.S. study went untreated for 40 years. Senator Edward Kennedy held hearings. The study was terminated. A class action lawsuit was filed. In 1974, the government settled for $10 million, $37,500 for living survivors, $15,000 for the families of those who had died. Here's what the settlement did not include: compensation for the wives who had been infected, compensation for the children born with congenital syphilis, compensation for the grandchildren who grew up without grandfathers, compensation for the decades of compounded poverty, medical suffering, and trauma that radiated outward from those 399 original men into an entire community." President Clinton issued a formal apology in 1997. He called it shameful. He said, "We can look you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful. And I am sorry." The men who survived, some of them in their 90s by then, bent over in wheelchairs, their bodies testament to what had been done to them, accepted the apology. Some of them wept. Some of them did not. One of them, a man named Herman Shaw, who was 94 years old and had enrolled in the study at age 26, and said, I am delighted the President made this apology, and I am very happy to accept it. However, I wish this had been done years ago. Herman Shaw died the following year. Radiation experiments on pregnant women. We move now from Alabama to Nashville, Tennessee. From the 1930s to the 1940s and 50s. From syphilis to something that required even more active deception. Vanderbilt University, one of the most prestigious medical institutions in the South, a place that pregnant women trusted, poor pregnant women who came to Vanderbilt's prenatal clinic because they had nowhere else to go. Beginning in 1945, researchers at Vanderbilt University, funded by the Public Health Service, began adding radioactive iron, iron-59, a radioactive isotope, to a vitamin drink given to these women during their prenatal visits. The women were told they were receiving supplements to help their babies. Some were told it was a special cocktail to improve their nutrition. Some weren't told anything at all. The drink was simply part of the clinic visit. What they were not told was that the drink contained radioactive material. They were not told they were part of an experiment. They were not asked for consent. They were not warned that their unborn children would be absorbing ionizing radiation during the most sensitive period of human development. The stated purpose of the research was to study how the human body absorbs iron during pregnancy, data that would theoretically be useful for understanding nutrition and, by extension, radiation exposure in the event of nuclear warfare. This was the early Cold War. The government was trying to understand what nuclear fallout would do to human bodies. Pregnant women, it turned out, were considered useful data points. The women were tracked for years afterward. Their children were tracked. What researchers found and documented included several cases of childhood cancer, leukemia, lymphoma, other malignancies. In at least 3 cases, the children of women who had received the radioactive cocktail died of childhood cancers before the age of 10. The families were never told. For decades, they had no idea that the vitamin drink their mothers had received at the prenatal clinic had contained radioactive isotopes. They had no framework for understanding why their children had gotten cancer. They simply grieved. The story didn't become public until the 1990s, when an investigative journalist for the Nashville Tennessean, who had been digging through declassified documents from the Atomic Energy Commission, found records of the Vanderbilt study. He tracked down survivors. He found women who were now in their 70s and 80s, women who had brought their children into Vanderbilt for free prenatal care and had instead been used as unwitting subjects in a radiation experiment. When they found out, many of them said some version of the same thing. We trusted them. We were poor, and we were scared, and we were pregnant, and we trusted them. The government settled civil suits with several families. Amounts were not publicly disclosed. Vanderbilt expressed regret. The Vanderbilt experiment was not unique. It was part of a pattern. Between 1944 and 1974, the Atomic Energy Commission and various government agencies funded hundreds of experiments involving the deliberate exposure of human subjects to radiation without their knowledge or consent. These experiments involved prisoners, hospital patients, people with terminal cancer who were told they were receiving experimental treatment, children in orphanages, soldiers, sailors. We'll come back to some of those. But first, we need to visit a school in Massachusetts. The Fernald School Experiments, the Walter E. Fernald State School in Waltham, Massachusetts. In the 1940s and 50s, this was an institution for what the state of Massachusetts called feeble-minded children, children with intellectual disabilities, orphans, and poor children whose families couldn't care for them. Many of the children had been placed there by parents who were told it was the best option, who were told Fernald offered education and medical care and a safe environment. They were right about one thing. Fernald offered medical care, just not the kind they were thinking of. Beginning in 1946, researchers from MIT and Harvard, funded by the National Institutes of Health, and notably by the Quaker Oats Company, began conducting nutritional experiments on the children at Fernald. Quaker Oats wanted data. They were in a competitive battle with Cream of Wheat about which cereal was more nutritious, and they wanted scientific proof that their product helped the body absorb calcium and iron. They needed human subjects to establish how minerals moved through the digestive system. They decided to use the boys at Fernald. The children were told they were joining a science club. They were given extra food, field trips to baseball games, visits to special events. They felt special. They felt chosen. For institutionalized children who received almost nothing, the attention and treats were extraordinary. What they were not told was that their breakfast cereal had been laced with radioactive iron and calcium, that the field trips were cover for collecting blood and urine samples, that they were not members of a science club. They were subjects in a radiation experiment. Consent forms were sent to parents. These forms mentioned dietary research. They did not mention radiation. Some children had no parents. They had only the state, which had consented on their behalf. The experiments continued for years. Children ate radioactive oatmeal and drank radioactive milk. Their waste was collected. Their blood was drawn. Their growth was measured. And then the researchers packed up their data, published their findings on iron absorption in scientific journals, and moved on. The children were never told. They grew up, left Fernald, built lives, some of them. And they had no idea that on Tuesday mornings at the school cafeteria in the 1950s, they had been fed radioactive cereal by researchers from MIT and Harvard, while the Quaker Oats Company watched. The story became public in 1994 when investigative journalist Eileen Wellsum, who would later win a Pulitzer Prize for her work on plutonium experiments, published a series of articles on government radiation experiments. The Fernald experiments were part of a larger investigative report commissioned by the Department of Energy. When the surviving Fernald subjects found out, they were in their 50s and 60s. Many were angry. Many were frightened, suddenly wondering whether the radiation they'd ingested as children had something to do with health problems they'd experienced as adults. Lawsuits were filed. MIT and the state of Massachusetts settled, paying $60,000 to each surviving subject. $60,000 for being fed radioactive food as a child without consent, for being used as a data point in a cereal company's marketing research. Robert Eaton, one of the survivors, testified before Congress. He said, "I was a little boy, and they were supposed to take care of me." He was right. They were supposed to take care of him. They used him instead. These are 3 stories, 3 institutions, 3 decades, 3 groups of people chosen because they were vulnerable, because they were black in the segregated South, because they were poor and pregnant and had nowhere else to go, because they were children with disabilities in state care. None of them consented. None of them were told the truth. And in every case, the researchers who used them were not monsters in the conventional sense. They were professionals with credentials and funding, and peer review and publication records. They ate lunch. They went home to their families. They attended conferences. They had simply decided that the scientific value of the data outweighed the humanity of the people generating it. That decision, that specific calculus, is what we need to hold in our minds as we move to the next chapter. Because the next program we're going to examine didn't just fail to inform its subjects. It was specifically designed to break their minds. April 13, 1953. CIA Director Allen Dulles approves a program that is, even by the standards of the Cold War, extraordinary in its ambition and its ruthlessness. The program is called MKUltra. It will run for 20 years. It will involve at least 150 separate research projects at 80 institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons, mental institutions. It will use thousands of subjects. It will produce some of the most disturbing documented evidence of government abuse in American history. And we know about it almost entirely by accident. Here's the context you need. It's 1953. The Korean War has been producing American prisoners of war who, when they return home, are saying things that make the CIA deeply nervous. Some of them are praising their captors. Some have signed confessions to atrocities they didn't commit. Some appear to have been psychologically transformed, their personalities altered, their memories rewritten, their loyalties scrambled. The CIA calls it brainwashing. They believe, and this belief is not entirely unreasonable given what they're seeing, that the Soviet Union and China have developed techniques for controlling the human mind. Techniques that can force confessions, implant false memories, turn loyal soldiers into propaganda tools. And the CIA's response to this threat is exactly what you'd expect. They decide to develop the same capabilities themselves. MKUltra's stated goal is to discover a truth serum, a substance or technique that would compel a subject to reveal information involuntarily. But the program quickly expands beyond that narrow objective. The researchers are also interested in inducing amnesia, or creating multiple personalities, programming subjects to perform actions they wouldn't remember, breaking down psychological resistance to suggestion. In plain language, mind control. The primary tool they reach for is LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. It had been discovered by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann in 1943, and its extraordinary psychedelic effects had made it immediately interesting to both the scientific and intelligence communities. The CIA had been quietly experimenting with it since the late 1940s. MKUltra would turn those experiments into an industrial operation. The experiments. The breadth of what happened under MKUltra is difficult to fully comprehend because most of the records were destroyed. In 1973, as the Watergate investigations were threatening to expose government misconduct across multiple agencies, a CIA director, Richard Helms, ordered the bulk of MKUltra files shredded. By the time congressional investigators found what remained, mostly financial records that had been misfiled in an accounting archive, an estimated 90% of the program's documentation was gone. What survived is enough to horrify. Subproject 35, Columbia University. Researchers are funded to study the effects of LSD on psychiatric patients who have been admitted to the hospital for treatment, who have signed consent forms for experimental procedures that in no way convey what those procedures actually involve. Subproject 68, Allen Memorial Institute, McGill University, Montreal. This is perhaps the most extreme documented case in the entire program. Dr. Ewan Cameron, a prominent Canadian psychiatrist, receives CIA funding through a front organization called the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. Cameron has a theory he calls psychic driving, the idea that you can erase a person's existing personality and reprogram them with new behaviors by combining heavy drug sedation, electroconvulsive therapy at doses far beyond any therapeutic use, sensory deprivation, and endless looped audio recordings. He calls his patients depatterned. That's the clinical term. What it means in practice is that these patients, people who came to Allen Memorial for help with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, were subjected to drug-induced sleep that lasted for weeks or months at a time. They were given doses of ECT at 30 to 40 times the normal intensity. They were placed in sensory deprivation chambers. They were made to listen to tape recordings on loop for 16, 20, sometimes 22 hours a day. Many emerged unable to remember who they were, unable to speak, unable to feed themselves, unable to remember their names, their families, their histories. They had been, in the most literal sense, erased. One woman named Mary Morrow checked herself into Allen Memorial in 1957 for mild anxiety and fatigue. She was 44 years old. She was held for almost 2 years. When she was discharged, she could not remember her children. She had reverted, in some respects, to a childlike state. She had to be taught basic life skills, how to cook, how to dress herself, skills she had known for decades before Cameron's depatterning. She spent the rest of her life piecing together fragments of who she had been. Cameron's CIA handlers, when they reviewed his progress reports, expressed concern not about the ethics of what he was doing, but about whether it was working. It wasn't, at least not in the way they'd hoped. You can't reliably program a human mind the way you'd program a computer. What you can do, Cameron proved, is destroy it. Operation Midnight Climax. If what happened at Allen Memorial represents the most sustained and systematic abuse within MKUltra, Operation Midnight Climax represents something different. A program that tells you more about the people running it than about the science they claimed to be pursuing. San Francisco, 1954. A CIA officer named George Hunter White rents an apartment at 225 Chestnut Street in the Telegraph Hill neighborhood. It's a nice apartment with a view of the bay. White decorates it as a brothel, complete with Toulouse-Lautrec prints, red lighting, and photographs of women on the walls. He then recruits prostitutes, paying them $100 a night, a substantial sum in 1954, to bring clients back to the apartment. Without the client's knowledge, White and other CIA officers are watching through two-way mirrors, and without the client's knowledge, they've been dosed with LSD. The stated justification for this program, and I want you to hold on to the word stated, because the gap between the stated justification and the apparent reality is significant, was that the CIA wanted to study LSD's effects on people who didn't know they'd taken it, in real-world settings rather than clinical environments. They also claimed they were gathering blackmail material on Soviet intelligence assets. What actually happened? Based on the records that survived and the testimony of George White himself, is that a CIA officer sat in a room decorated like a brothel, drinking martinis through a one-way mirror, watching confused men have sex with prostitutes while under the influence of a powerful hallucinogen. White described it in a letter written after his retirement. "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. Fun, 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 the operative word. He was doing it because it was fun. The men who were dosed, ordinary men, some of them, perhaps, not the most upstanding citizens given their presence in a brothel, but ordinary human beings, never knew what had happened to them. Many of them probably thought they'd had a psychotic episode, a nervous breakdown. Some strange, terrible night they couldn't quite remember. They had no framework, no recourse, no way to understand that an agency of the United States government had deliberately given them a powerful hallucinogenic drug and watched what happened. They were never identified. They were never compensated. They were never told. The San Francisco operation ran from 1955 to 1965. A parallel operation ran in New York at an apartment on Bedford Street in Greenwich Village. Similar setup, similar methods, similar results, a lot of confused, terrified civilians, and a lot of CIA agents who thought they were doing science. The sacrifice of Frank Olson, for all the horror of what happened at Allen Memorial and in the MK Ultra safe houses. The case that most directly illustrates what the program was willing to do and what it was willing to cover up is the death of Frank Olson. Frank Olson was a CIA biochemist. He was a veteran, a scientist, a husband and father of 3 children. He worked at Fort Detrick in Maryland, which was then, and still is, the center of the United States Biological Weapons Program. In 1953, Olson was part of a group of CIA employees who gathered for a work-in retreat at a cabin in Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. On the second evening, a CIA officer named Sidney Gottlieb, who ran MK Ultra, spiked the after-dinner liqueur with LSD without telling anyone. The idea was to observe the effects of LSD on people who didn't know they'd taken it. CIA employees, this time, rather than civilians. Olson had a severe reaction. He became paranoid, disoriented, deeply disturbed. He was already, apparently, under significant psychological stress. There is evidence that in the weeks before the retreat, he had been expressing deep moral doubts about some of the work he'd witnessed in the biological weapons program, including experiments on human subjects. The LSD experience appeared to push him into a crisis. He was taken to New York to see a CIA-approved psychiatrist. He was monitored. He was told not to discuss what he was feeling with anyone. And then, on November 28, 1953, 9 days after being dosed with LSD, Frank Olson fell through the window of his room on the 13th floor of the Statler Hotel in Manhattan. He died on the sidewalk below. He was 43 years old. The CIA told his wife, Alice, that Frank had suffered a mental breakdown and jumped out the window. They told her almost nothing else. They gave her no details. They offered no explanation for why a healthy 43-year-old scientist with no history of psychological problems had suddenly developed a psychotic episode requiring a hotel stay in New York. For 22 years, Alice Olson and her children lived with that incomplete, haunting story. Then, in 1975, the Rockefeller Commission investigation into CIA activities disclosed that an unnamed government employee had died after being unknowingly dosed with LSD as part of MK Ultra. The family recognized Frank immediately. The CIA confirmed it. They paid the family $750,000 and issued an apology. But the family wasn't satisfied. The more they investigated, the more the suicide story unraveled. In 1994, Frank Olson's sons had his body exhumed. A forensic pathologist named James Starrs from George Washington University conducted a second autopsy. He found evidence of blunt force trauma to the head, a wound consistent with being struck before going through the window, not with jumping through a window. He also found that the pattern of the injuries was inconsistent with a voluntary fall. Starrs concluded that the evidence points toward a homicide. The New York District Attorney's Office opened a homicide investigation. They ultimately concluded that there was insufficient evidence to file charges, given that 50 years had passed and the primary witnesses were dead or unavailable. But the Manhattan DA's investigators did establish one thing beyond reasonable doubt. The government had lied. Frank Olson's death had not been the spontaneous psychotic break of a troubled man. It had been preceded by a covert government drug experiment, and every story the CIA had told the family in the intervening years, every reassurance, every official statement had been constructed to protect the program rather than serve the truth. Frank Olson's son, Eric, has spent decades pursuing the truth about his father's death. He never accepted the government's account. He has said, in public testimony and in interviews, that he believes his father was murdered, not because of the MK Ultra experiments per se, but because of what Frank Olson knew about the biological weapons program, because of the doubts he'd been expressing, because of what he might have told someone outside the system. The official verdict remains: death by suicide. The family remains unconvinced. MK Ultra officially ended in 1973 when Richard Helms ordered the files destroyed. Officially. But here's the question you should be sitting with as we move into the next chapter. If a program this extensive, this well-funded, this institutionally embedded, if this program was running for 20 years without public knowledge, what else was running alongside it? What else was running instead of it? The answer, in part, is what we're going to look at next. Programs that didn't just manipulate individual minds, but tried to manipulate the entire country. Operation Northwoods, March 13, 1962. The Pentagon. The document that lands on President Kennedy's desk that day is extraordinary, not in a good way. It is a memorandum from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, signed by General Lyman Lemnitzer, Chairman. It is titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba, and it contains a proposal that, even 60 years later, reading it in the calm of historical hindsight, produces a kind of vertiginous disbelief. The Joint Chiefs want to manufacture a war with Cuba. They want to do this by staging attacks on American soil against American people. The document is 28 pages long. It is detailed, specific, operational. It reads like a planning document because it is a planning document reviewed and approved by the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff before being sent to the President. Let me walk you through some of what it proposes. Option 1. Stage a series of apparent communist Cuban attacks on the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay. Blow up ammunition facilities, burn aircraft, sink a ship in the harbor, dress American soldiers in Cuban uniforms and have them attack the base. Generate U.S. casualties, real ones or simulated. The document is somewhat ambiguous, to create the pretext for a military response. Option 2. Develop a Cuba dossier, a list of perceived provocations that would create a credible internal attack. That is, an attack that looks like it came from Cuba but was actually staged by American operatives. Option 3. Create an international incident involving a civilian aircraft. Paint a plane to look identical to a commercial airliner. Fill it with fake passengers, a duplicate flight, with real charter flights used for cover. Blow it up. Blame Castro. Option 4, and this one I want you to hear clearly. Sink a boatload of Cuban refugees. Stage it as a Cuban attack on Cubans fleeing to freedom in America. Manufacture grieving relatives. Generate news coverage. Create what the document calls a helpful wave of indignation. The document concludes, we could sink a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba. The document is real. It was declassified in 1997 and can be read in full in the National Security Archive at George Washington University. It is not a fringe document. It is not a rogue operation proposed by a single unhinged officer. It was reviewed and approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military authority in the United States, below the President, and transmitted to the Secretary of Defense. President Kennedy, when he received it, rejected it immediately. According to multiple accounts, he was furious. He removed General Lemnitzer from his position as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Operation Northwoods never happened. But here's what the document tells us, what its existence establishes as documented historical fact. The highest levels of the American military in 1962 were prepared to murder American civilians, to sink ships, blow up planes, shoot Cuban exiles, to manufacture a justification for war. They didn't do it because the president said no. The president is not always present to say no. The Gulf of Tonkin, 2 years after Operation Northwoods was rejected, something happened in the Gulf of Tonkin that sent 500,000 American troops to Vietnam. Or rather, something was reported to have happened. The details matter enormously. August 2, 1964, the USS Maddox, an American destroyer, is conducting an intelligence-gathering mission in the Gulf of Tonkin, off the coast of North Vietnam. 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats approach and attack. The Maddox returns fire. The torpedo boats are damaged. 1 American aircraft is hit. No Americans are killed. This is the first incident. It is real. It happened. Now, August 4th, 1964. The Maddox and a second destroyer, the USS Turner Joy, are back in the Gulf of Tonkin. It's nighttime. The weather is rough. Conditions are poor for radar and sonar. The crews are jumpy after the real attack 2 days earlier. The ships report contact with enemy vessels. They report torpedoes in the water. They open fire. The engagement lasts for hours. When it's over, the crew of the Maddox reports that they've engaged multiple enemy vessels. President Johnson uses this second incident to go to Congress. He presents the attack as an unprovoked, aggressive act of war against the United States. He asks for, and receives, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which grants him broad war powers in Southeast Asia without a formal declaration of war. America is now in Vietnam. Here's the thing about that second attack. There is no credible evidence that it happened. The commander of the Maddox himself, Captain John Herrick, sent a cable to Washington within hours of the engagement that should have stopped everything. The cable read, in part, "Review of action makes many reported contacts and torpedoes fired appear doubtful. Freak weather effects on radar and overeager sonarmen may have accounted for many reports. No actual visual sightings by Maddox. Suggest complete evaluation before any action taken." Captain Herrick was not sure his ship had been attacked. He was saying, in plain language, that the engagement might have been phantom radar returns, jumpy sonarmen, and the fog of night operations in rough weather. That cable was not shared with Congress when Johnson asked for war powers. Robert McNamara, who was Secretary of Defense at the time, and who spent the rest of his life in something resembling penance for the Vietnam War, acknowledged in his 2003 memoir and in the documentary film The Fog of War that the second attack was at best uncertain and possibly didn't happen at all. Johnson himself, in a conversation recorded by the White House taping system, said, "For all I know, our Navy was shooting at whales out there." In 2005, a declassified NSA analysis of the incident concluded that the second attack never occurred. It was phantom contacts, misinterpreted signals, and the desperate desire of overstressed sailors to make sense of confusing data. No second attack, no casus belli, no honest cause for the war. 58,000 Americans died in Vietnam. Somewhere between 1 million and 3 million Vietnamese died, depending on the methodology of the count. Millions more were wounded, displaced, poisoned by Agent Orange, or left with the psychological wreckage that combat produces. Countries were carpet-bombed into rubble. A generation was broken. And it rested, in significant part, on an incident that the President's own Secretary of Defense later described as possibly never having happened. Iraq and the Weapons of Mass Destruction, February 5, 2003. The United Nations Security Council Chamber, New York. Colin Powell, Secretary of State, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a man whose credibility is, at this point, perhaps the highest of any American official since Eisenhower, sits down at the table. He has visual aids. He has audio recordings. He has satellite imagery. He has a detailed, methodical, 45-minute presentation. He tells the Security Council, and through them, the world, that Saddam Hussein's Iraq possesses weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons stockpiles, mobile biological weapons laboratories, an active nuclear weapons program. He presents this not as suspicion or estimation, but as demonstrated fact. "My colleagues," he says, "every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources." 6 weeks later, the United States invades Iraq. Let's walk through what Powell presented and what was subsequently established about each claim. The mobile biological weapons laboratories, satellite images that Powell described as proof of mobile weapons production facilities. These turned out to be weather balloon inflation equipment, a finding confirmed by United Nations inspectors after the invasion. The specific intelligence came from a source codenamed Curveball, a single Iraqi defector who was known by German intelligence, the agency managing him, to be unreliable. German intelligence had explicitly warned U.S. intelligence that Curveball's claims should be treated with skepticism. That warning was not conveyed to Powell for his presentation. The aluminum tubes. Powell presented aluminum tubes that Iraq had been attempting to import as evidence of a nuclear weapons program. Specifically, evidence that Iraq was trying to build centrifuges for uranium enrichment. The problem: the State Department's own Bureau of Intelligence and Research and the Department of Energy, the agencies most technically qualified to evaluate the claim, had both concluded before Powell's speech that the tubes were almost certainly intended for conventional rocket artillery, not centrifuges. Their dissent was noted in the classified National Intelligence Estimate. It was not included in Powell's presentation. The yellow cake uranium from Niger. Powell didn't emphasize this claim heavily, but the broader Bush administration case for war included the assertion that Iraq had been trying to purchase uranium from Niger. This claim was based on documents that were later established to be forgeries. So crudely forged, it turned out, that a former ambassador named Joseph Wilson was able to debunk them within days of examining them. The forgeries were apparently created by a small-time Italian intelligence operative and acquired by the CIA through a back channel. Wilson's report of his investigation was ignored. When he went public with his debunking after the invasion, the White House responded by leaking the identity of his wife, Valerie Plame, was as a CIA operative, destroying her career and exposing her network of contacts in retaliation for her husband's inconvenient truth-telling. What the invasion found: no stockpiles of chemical or biological weapons, no active nuclear program, no functional WMD program of any kind. The infrastructure that had existed in the 1980s, when Saddam had indeed possessed chemical weapons, some of them manufactured with components and precursor chemicals sold to Iraq by American companies with government approval, had been destroyed in the 1990s, either by UN inspectors or by Saddam's own order. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence's 2004 report concluded that the intelligence community's pre-war assessments were either overstated or were not supported by the underlying intelligence reporting. A more colloquial description: the intelligence had been manipulated cherry-picked, and presented to the public in a way that made the case for war appear stronger than the actual evidence supported. Over 4,000 Americans died in Iraq. Conservative estimates put Iraqi civilian deaths from the war and its aftermath at over 100,000. Some estimates go higher, much higher. A region was destabilized in ways whose consequences are still unfolding. Powell, to his credit, later called his UN presentation a blot on his record, one of the most painful things he'd ever had to do. He died in 2021. The officials most responsible for the decision to go to war have never been charged with any crime. Several have written books. Some give speeches. A few have been rehabilitated by their opposition to more recent political figures, invited onto television to comment gravely on the importance of institutional integrity, false flags, manufactured attacks, presented evidence. The mechanism is consistent across 60 years and 2 very different wars. Find a reason or invent one, and then use it. And when the truth emerges, when the cables and the classified assessments and the forged documents and the whistleblowers produce a record that can no longer be denied, issue clarifications, acknowledge mistakes in judgment, ensure that no one is held accountable. We've been looking at what the government does to start wars. Now let's look at what it does to people at home who ask questions about it. COINTELPRO 1956. J. Edgar Hoover has been director of the FBI for 32 years. He has survived 7 presidents. He has compiled files on everyone who matters and many who don't. He has built an agency in his own image, obsessive, secretive, convinced that the greatest threats to America come not from foreign governments, but from Americans themselves. Specifically, Americans who disagree with J. Edgar Hoover about what America should be. In August of 1956, Hoover formally authorizes COINTELPRO. The name stands for Counterintelligence Program. Its stated purpose is to combat communist infiltration of American institutions. Its actual purpose, as revealed by the documents that were stolen from an FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania, in 1971, and confirmed by subsequent congressional investigations, was considerably broader: to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize any group or individual that the FBI considers a threat. The definition of threat is expansive. It includes the Communist Party, yes, but it also includes the Socialist Workers' Party, the NAACP, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Students for a Democratic Society, the Black Panther Party, the American Indian Movement, Puerto Rican independence organizations, and perhaps most infamously, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and its leader, Martin Luther King, Jr. The FBI's tactics under COINTELPRO run from the invasive to the criminal. They include mail opening in violation of federal law, wiretapping without warrants, physical surveillance of activists and their families, infiltration of organizations by paid informants, the use of informants not just to gather intelligence, but to actively disrupt, create internal dissension, and provoke conflicts. The manufacture and distribution of forged documents designed to create distrust between organizations. Anonymous letters to members of targets' families designed to destroy their personal relationships, and, in at least one case, the assassination of Fred Hampton, the provision of information to local police that facilitated a murder. We'll come to Hampton shortly. First, Martin Luther King. The campaign against Martin Luther King Jr. In the FBI's files, which now number in the hundreds of thousands of pages, most of them eventually made public through FOIA requests and congressional disclosure. Martin Luther King Jr. receives a designation given to very few targets. He is classified as a racial agitator. More specifically, in FBI internal documents, he is at various points described as the most dangerous Negro in America and the most notorious liar in the country. The FBI had placed King under surveillance since the 1950s. By the early 1960s, as King's prominence grew, the surveillance intensified. They tapped his hotel rooms. They tapped his home phone and office phones. They tapped the phones of his associates. They ran informants inside the SCLC. What they were looking for, primarily, was evidence of communist influence on King. Hoover was convinced, or claimed to be convinced, that King was being manipulated by communist advisors. They found little that supported this theory. They found something else instead. King was a man with an extraordinary public life and as the surveillance revealed, a complicated private one. He had affairs. The FBI documented them carefully, recording conversations and encounters through the hotel room bugs. They built a dossier. And then, in November 1964, shortly before King was to travel to Oslo to accept the Nobel Peace Prize, the FBI sent him a package. The package contained audio recordings from hotel rooms, recordings that the FBI believed would be deeply embarrassing if made public. It also contained a letter. The letter was typed anonymously. It was designed to look as though it had been written by a fellow black man, disillusioned with King, someone who had seen the hypocrisy beneath the public image. It called King a fraud, a colossal fraud. It referenced the recordings. It said, "King, there is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is." The implication was explicit. Kill yourself. The letter concluded, "You are done. There is but one way out for you. You better take it before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is bared to the nation." This letter, this anonymous call for a man to kill himself, sent by the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, with the knowledge and approval of the highest levels of that agency, is not disputed. It is documented. It is in the National Archives. You can read it. William Sullivan, the head of the FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division, who supervised the operation, later admitted that the letter was written and sent exactly as described. Sullivan himself may have written it. King did not comply, obviously. He went to Oslo. He accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. He continued his work for 9 more years, until a sniper's bullet ended it in Memphis in 1968. The FBI did not stop their campaign against him after the letter. They continued their surveillance. They continued their attempts to find and exploit compromising information. They continued after his death. They opened a new file on Coretta Scott King, his widow, monitoring her civil rights activities for years after her husband was murdered. The Senate's Church Committee investigation in the mid-1970s produced a 96-page report on the FBI's campaign against King, titled Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Case Study. It is one of the most damning documents ever produced about an American government agency. At the time it was released, J. Edgar Hoover had been dead for 3 years. He had died in office in 1972 at the age of 77, after 48 years as director of the FBI. He was given a state funeral. President Nixon delivered a eulogy. Congress voted to name the FBI headquarters building after him, the J. Edgar Hoover Building, on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., where it still stands today. Fred Hampton, December 4, 1969, 4:45 a.m., 2337 West Monroe Street, Chicago, Illinois. Fred Hampton is 21 years old. He is the deputy chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party and one of the most talented young political organizers in the country. He has built a rainbow coalition in Chicago, an unprecedented alliance of street gangs, poor white Appalachian migrants, Latino organizations, all unified around a program of community service and political consciousness. He is, by nearly every account, extraordinarily gifted. People who knew him say he had the kind of presence that made you want to follow him. He is also, according to the FBI, one of the most dangerous men in Illinois. At 4:45 a.m., more than a dozen Chicago police officers and agents from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office execute a raid on Hampton's apartment. They claim they expect to encounter heavily armed resistance. They have been provided with a detailed floor plan of the apartment, a floor plan that marks specifically the bedroom where Fred Hampton sleeps. The floor plan was provided by William O'Neill. O'Neill was Hampton's head of security and his most trusted associate. He was also an FBI informant who had been providing information about Hampton and the Chicago Panthers since 1968. The FBI paid O'Neill $300 a month, plus bonuses for his services. The raid lasted about 7 minutes. The police fired somewhere between 82 and 99 shots into the apartment. One shot, possibly one, came from inside. That shot may have been fired by Mark Clark, another Panther who was stationed as a guard by the front door and who, forensic evidence suggests, fired a single reflexive shot as he was being killed. Fred Hampton was shot twice in the head. According to survivors of the raid, survivors who were arrested and initially charged with aggravated assault before the charges were dropped, Hampton was sleeping when the first shots came. His bodyguard said Hampton was unconscious, possibly drugged. A toxicology report would later show barbiturates in his system, and that he never woke up. That he was shot in his bed, where he lay next to his pregnant fiancée, who survived. The initial official account said the police had come under heavy fire and responded in self-defense. This account didn't survive scrutiny. Forensic analysis commissioned by Hampton's family established that of the bullets fired, the overwhelming majority had been fired inward, into the apartment, rather than outward. The FBI's own photos of the scene showed bullet holes in doors that pointed the wrong way for the self-defense narrative. A federal grand jury later called the official account unworthy of belief. In 1982, after years of litigation, the city of Chicago, Cook County, and the federal government settled a lawsuit brought by Hampton's family for $1.85 million. The settlement came with no admission of liability. O'Neill, the informant whose floor plan had made the raid possible, I was paid a $300 bonus by the FBI after Hampton's death. He received the bonus on December 5, 1969, the day after the raid. He later expressed remorse. In 1990, he was interviewed for the documentary film Eyes on the Prize. He appeared deeply troubled. Several months after the interview aired, he was killed in what was ruled an accident, struck by a car on the Eisenhower Expressway in Chicago. He was 40 years old. NSA mass surveillance. The story of how the United States government came to be conducting systematic mass surveillance of its own citizens is a story that, in its current form, most people date to 2013, to Edward Snowden, to The Guardian, to the cascade of revelations that showed the NSA collecting phone records on every American, monitoring internet traffic, working with telecommunications companies to access the backbone of global communications. But the surveillance state didn't begin in 2013. It didn't even begin after September 11, 2001. It began in the 1940s, and it has been running in some form ever since. Operation Shamrock. Beginning in 1945, the NSA and its predecessor agencies entered into agreements with the three major international telegraph companies, RCA, ITT, and Western Union International, to provide copies of all international telegrams passing through the United States. Every international telegram, not just suspicious ones, not just ones from known foreign agents, all of them. By the time Shamrock was exposed in the 1975 Church Committee investigation, it had been running for 30 years. In peak years, the NSA was processing 150,000 telegrams a month. Operation Minaret, running concurrently with Shamrock, applied similar surveillance to phone calls and specifically targeted American citizens whose names had been placed on a watch list. The watch list included anti-war activists, civil rights leaders, and journalists. Martin Luther King Jr. was on it. Muhammad Ali was on it. Senator Frank Church, who would later investigate these programs, was on it. When the Church Committee exposed these programs, it produced reform legislation, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, passed in 1978, which required the NSA to obtain warrants for surveillance of Americans from a special court, the FISA Court. The NSA agreed to comply. The programs ended. Or rather, the programs were renamed and restructured. After September 11th, 2001, the Bush administration authorized the NSA to resume warrantless collection of Americans' communications under a program called Stellar Wind, classified at a level so high that the NSA's own lawyers weren't fully briefed on it. When the program was eventually revealed through unauthorized leaks, the administration's defense was that the September 11th attacks had created new exigencies that required new authorities. Snowden's leaks in 2013 revealed the full scope of what had been built since 2001. PRISM, which collected data directly from the servers of major internet companies. XKeyscore, which allowed analysts to search virtually all internet communications. Bulk collection of phone metadata on every American. Every call made. Every number dialed. Every duration and location. Compiled into a database that could be queried by analysts looking for patterns. The FISA Court, which was supposed to provide judicial oversight, had issued rulings that were secret, that couldn't be appealed or even disclosed to the public, and that had authorized surveillance programs far beyond what the plain text of FISA could reasonably be read to permit. One judge on the FISA court, Reggie Walton, told the Washington Post that the court lacked the tools to independently evaluate NSA claims about its programs and largely had to take the agency's word for what it was doing. A court that takes the surveillance agency's word for it, operating in secret, with no public accountability. Snowden is currently living in Moscow, where he was granted asylum by Russia after the U.S. government charged him with espionage. He has been offered pardons by some politicians and condemned as a traitor by others. The surveillance programs he exposed have been modified. Some have been restructured to require more judicial oversight. The fundamental capability, the infrastructure to collect and analyze American communications at scale, remains in place. Operation Sea Spray, September 1950. San Francisco. For 6 days, September 20th through 26th, Navy ships off the coast of California spray two kinds of bacteria over the city, Serratia marsecans and Bacillus globigi. The clouds drift inland on the coastal wind. They settle over the Golden Gate. They drift over Twin Peaks and the Mission and the Richmond district. They settle on buildings, on streets, on the laundry hanging on clotheslines, on the faces and hands and lungs of several 100,000 people going about their morning routines. The military considers these bacteria simulants, stand-ins for actual biological weapons, chosen because they believed them to be harmless. They're testing two things: how a biological weapons release would disperse over an urban population, and whether the city's existing organisms would overwhelm or be overwhelmed by an introduced pathogen. San Francisco was chosen partly because its fog and wind patterns were considered useful data, and partly, we can infer, because no one asked the residents of San Francisco whether they wanted to participate in a biological warfare experiment. Shortly after the spray operation, Edward Nevin III was admitted to Stanford University Hospital with a urinary tract infection caused by Serratia marsecans. He was a 75-year-old retired pipe fitter with a pre-existing kidney condition. The Serratia infection attacked his already compromised system. He developed endocarditis, an infection of the heart valves. He died 3 weeks later. Nevin's family would not learn for decades that his death might have been connected to a government biological warfare test. When Edward Nevin III, the original patient's grandson, found out in the 1970s and sued the federal government, the government's defense was the bacteria were considered harmless, the release was a legitimate security operation, and the connection between the spray and the elder Nevin's death could not be definitively proven. The Nevin family lost. Sea Spray was one operation in a program that, between 1949 and 1969, conducted hundreds of open-air tests of biological and chemical agents over American cities and areas: Minneapolis, St. Louis, the New York City subway system, Washington National Airport, the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Researchers released bacteria from planes and rooftops and moving vehicles. They watched how the agents dispersed. They took samples. They filed reports. The people below them had no idea. St. Louis and the targeting of black neighborhoods. The St. Louis experiments deserve special attention because of what they reveal about who the government chose to test on. Between 1953 and 1965, the Army sprayed zinc cadmium sulfide, mixed, in at least some operations, with radioactive particles, over multiple locations in St. Louis. The chemical was described publicly as a harmless smokescreen material. The real purpose was to study how fine particles would disperse in an urban environment, modeling how a biological or chemical weapons release would spread through a city. The areas selected for the densest spraying: Pruitt-Igoe, a massive public housing project on the north side, predominantly black. Severely impoverished: the Carr Square Village housing project, again, predominantly black, predominantly poor. Researchers mounted dispersal equipment on the rooftops of buildings and on jeeps. On the days of the tests, residents would see trucks driving slowly through their neighborhoods, releasing what appeared to be fog or smoke. Children played in it. Adults walked through it. It settled on groceries, on toys, on windowsills, on the places where babies crawled. The same compounds were sprayed in other St. Louis neighborhoods as well, but the density of coverage and the deliberate targeting of the most vulnerable, densely populated areas tells a story about who the government was willing to sacrifice for data. Some areas were reportedly sprayed 1,600 times over the course of the program. In the years since the story broke, it was first exposed through FOIA documents in the 1990s. Researchers and community advocates have attempted to establish a connection between the spraying and the elevated cancer rates observed in some affected neighborhoods. The Army has maintained that zinc cadmium sulfide is safe at the concentrations used, and that any radioactive material in the mixture posed no significant health risk. The families who lived through it are less certain. Agent Orange. From 1961 to 1971, the United States military sprayed approximately 20 million gallons of herbicide over the forests and farmland of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The most commonly used herbicide was a mixture containing 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, which came to be known by the color of the storage drums in which it was shipped. Agent Orange. The purpose was military, to strip the forest canopy that provided cover for North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces, and to destroy crops in areas supplying those forces. It worked in a limited tactical sense. It also did something the military either didn't know or chose not to disclose. 2,4,5-T was contaminated with a chemical called 2,3,7,8-tetrachlorodibenzo-P-dioxin, or TCDD, one of the most toxic synthetic compounds ever produced, a potent carcinogen and endocrine disruptor. American pilots and ground troops walked through areas that had been sprayed. They flew through the spray clouds. Some pilots, not knowing the risks, deliberately flew through spray operations to cool off. Their skin absorbed the dioxin. Their lungs absorbed it. They carried it home in their bodies. In the years that followed the war, veterans began reporting unusual patterns of illness, cancers, particularly soft tissue sarcomas and lymphomas, at rates that were higher than expected. Children born with severe birth defects, a cluster of problems that didn't fit any obvious explanation. When veterans began raising the connection to Agent Orange, the Department of Veterans Affairs dismissed them. The government commissioned studies. The studies were reviewed. For 2 decades, the official position was that the evidence of a connection between Agent Orange exposure and veteran health problems was insufficient to warrant benefits. This wasn't a mistake born of scientific uncertainty. Internal documents from the period show that the chemical companies that manufactured Agent Orange, Dow Chemical and Monsanto, primarily had known about the dioxin contamination since at least the early 1960s and had communicated this to government officials. They had data from their own workers that showed troubling health patterns. Veterans who tried to sue the manufacturers were blocked by claims of government contractor immunity. Veterans who tried to get VA benefits were denied for want of evidence. A generation of men who had served their country came home to be told, essentially, that their bodies were lying to them. In 1991, Congress finally passed the Agent Orange Act, which presumed service connection for certain cancers in veterans who had served in Vietnam. It was a victory, belated and partial, but a victory. The VA has since expanded the list of presumptive conditions multiple times as evidence has accumulated. The Vietnamese population has received no formal compensation. An estimated 4 million Vietnamese people were exposed to Agent Orange. Vietnam still has areas of dioxin contamination. Vietnamese children are still being born with birth defects at elevated rates in the most heavily sprayed regions. In 2012, the United States began funding a cleanup program at Da Nang Air Base, one of the sites where Agent Orange had been stored and loaded onto aircraft. It is a start. It is also 40 years late. The CIA and democracy. Let's take inventory. Since the end of World War II, the United States has, according to researchers who have analyzed declassified documents and historical records, intervened to overthrow or attempted to overthrow more than 50 foreign governments. In many cases, these governments were democratically elected. In many cases, the intervention replaced a democracy with an authoritarian government that went on to commit systematic human rights abuses. In many cases, the CIA's own documents show that officials were fully aware of what they were enabling. We cannot examine all 50 in depth, but we can walk through 4 that are particularly instructive. 4 case studies in how the United States decided that what it wanted mattered more than what other people had voted for. Iran. 1953, Mohammad Mossadegh was a 70-year-old lawyer and politician who, in 1951, became Prime Minister of Iran following a democratic election. He was popular. Time magazine named him Man of the Year in 1951. He was a nationalist, and his nationalism led him to do something that made powerful people very angry. He nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which had been extracting Iranian oil for decades while paying the Iranian government a small royalty and keeping the vast majority of the profits. The nationalization was enormously popular in Iran. It was considerably less popular in London, where the British government had a significant stake in Anglo-Iranian, and in Washington, where Eisenhower's administration was increasingly convinced that Mossadegh's nationalism would open the door to communist influence. In 1953, the CIA ran Operation Ajax, working with British intelligence and a network of Iranian military officers, clerics, and politicians, the CIA organized a coup. They paid mobs to riot. Documents show cash flowing to organizers of street violence. They bribed newspaper editors to run anti-Mossadic propaganda. They worked with military officers to ensure that when the moment came, the army would not defend the elected government. The coup succeeded. Mossadegh was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by house arrest for the rest of his life. He died under house arrest in 1967. In his place, the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was reinstated with full power. The Shah was anti-communist, pro-Western, and supportive of American oil interests. He was also, through his secret police force, SAVAK, were responsible for the torture and murder of thousands of political dissidents. His regime became a byword for authoritarian brutality. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution swept the Shah from power. The revolutionaries who replaced him, Ayatollah Khomeini and the Islamic Republic, held a specific, well-grounded grievance against the United States for its role in the 1953 coup and its subsequent support for the Shah's government. This grievance is one of the defining features of U.S.-Iranian relations to this day. The CIA formally acknowledged Operation Ajax in 2013 when it declassified documents confirming its role in the coup. The Iranian government has been pointing at this event for 60 years. Guatemala, 1954. Jacobo Arbenz was elected president of Guatemala in 1950 with 65% of the vote. He was a military officer and a moderate reformist who believed that Guatemala's extreme inequality, where a tiny landowning class, including the United Fruit Company, controlled enormous amounts of land while most Guatemalans lived in poverty, was both unjust and destabilizing. In 1952, he implemented a land reform program that expropriated unused land from large landholders and redistributed it to poor farmers. He offered compensation based on the land's declared tax value. The United Fruit Company, an American corporation that owned vast tracts of Guatemalan land, objected strenuously. United Fruit had friends. Its lobbyists and lawyers included people with close connections to the Eisenhower administration. The Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, and CIA Director Allen Dulles had both had professional relationships with United Fruit before entering government. Whether this constituted a conflict of interest was never formally examined. The Eisenhower administration decided that Arbenz was a communist. The evidence for this characterization was thin. Arbenz was a nationalist reformist who included communists in a broad political coalition, but who was not himself a communist and who was pursuing a capitalist development model. But in the Cold War framework, any leader who threatened American corporate interests and who included communists in his government was, by definition, a Soviet proxy. Operation PB Success was the CIA's plan to remove him. It involved arming and training a force of Guatemalan exiles and mercenaries in Honduras and Nicaragua, running a psychological warfare campaign using a pirate radio station and forged documents to demoralize the Guatemalan army and government. Conducting airstrikes using CIA-contracted pilots on Guatemalan military targets. In June 1954, the operation succeeded. Arbenz, faced with an advancing army that was considerably smaller than his military, could have defeated, but demoralized by the psychological campaign, and abandoned by officers who had been bribed, resigned, and went into exile. What followed? 40 years of military dictatorship, political repression, and civil war. Between 200,000 and 250,000 people were killed in the civil conflict that followed the 1954 coup. A UN-sponsored Truth Commission, the Historical Clarification Commission, concluded in 1999 that acts of genocide had been committed against the Mayan population and that the United States exercised pressure to maintain the counter-revolutionary process. United Fruit Company continued operating in Guatemala. The land reform program was reversed. The poor farmers who had received redistributed land lost it. Chile, 1973. Salvador Allende was a physician and socialist politician who was elected president of Chile in 1970 in a democratic election. He received more votes than any other candidate, though not a majority, requiring the Chilean Congress to confirm his election, which they did. He then proceeded to implement the platform he had campaigned on: nationalization of the copper industry, land reform, expanded social services, a democratic path to socialism. He called it the Chilean Road to Socialism, an experiment in whether a country could transition to socialism through democratic means rather than revolution. The Nixon administration, led by Henry Kissinger, found this intolerable, not primarily because Allende was a communist. He wasn't in any Soviet sense, but because the Chilean road was genuinely dangerous to American interests. If Chile demonstrated that a country could democratically choose socialism and make it work, other countries might follow. The Nixon administration's fear was of example, not of tanks. Kissinger reportedly said, "I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its own people." The U.S. response was multi-pronged. They worked to make the economy scream, implementing financial measures designed to destabilize Chile's economy and reduce Allende's popularity. They funded opposition political groups and media. They established contact with Chilean military officers who were open to a coup. On September 11, 1973, Chilean Air Force jets bombed the presidential palace, La Moneda, in Santiago. Army troops stormed the building. Allende died during the assault. Whether by his own hand or by assassination remains disputed, though the weight of evidence favors suicide. In his place came Augusto Pinochet, who would rule Chile for 17 years. During that time, at least 3,000 people were killed or disappeared by the regime. Tens of thousands were tortured, many at a detention and torture center called Villa Grimaldi and aboard the Navy ship Esmeralda. Hundreds of thousands were exiled. The democratic institutions Allende had governed through were abolished. Many of those who were tortured and killed were held in stadiums, Chile's soccer stadiums, converted into detention centers in the days after the coup. The images, when they emerged, were horrifying. Pinochet was finally indicted in the 1990s by a Spanish judge named Baltasar Garzón for crimes against humanity, including the torture and murder of Spanish citizens. He spent years under house arrest in England, fighting extradition before being allowed to return to Chile. He died in 2006, before any of the trials against him were concluded. The CIA's role in the coup was acknowledged and documented through declassification of intelligence materials. Kissinger, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1973, has never been tried or charged with any crime. El Salvador and the death squads. The pattern we've traced across Iran, Guatemala, and Chile, the support for violent regimes in the name of anti-communism, did not end with the 1970s. It was carried forward into the 1980s with exceptional brutality in Central America. In El Salvador, a civil war between the US-backed government and leftist guerrilla forces, the FMLN, was producing atrocities. The government's security forces were running death squads, plainclothes units that kidnapped, tortured, and murdered suspected dissidents, union organizers, priests, teachers, and civilians. The bodies were found in ditches, on roadsides, bearing the marks of torture. The United States provided more than $1 billion in military assistance to the Salvadoran government during the 1980s. U.S. military advisors trained Salvadoran officers. Some of these officers had been trained at the School of the Americas, the U.S. military's training program for Latin American military officers, which became notorious for the subsequent human rights records of its graduates. In December 1980, 4 American women were murdered in El Salvador, 3 Catholic nuns and a lay missionary, all doing humanitarian work with refugees and the displaced. They were abducted, raped, and shot by members of the Salvadoran National Guard. The Reagan administration's initial response was to minimize and to deflect. Secretary of State Alexander Haig, in congressional testimony, suggested the women might have been running a roadblock. UN Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick said the women were not just nuns, but political activists. The implication, in both cases, was that the victims had brought their fate upon themselves. This was false. The evidence established clearly that the women had been doing exactly what they said they were doing, providing humanitarian assistance. 5 National Guard members were eventually convicted of the murders, but they were lower-ranking soldiers, and the investigation never seriously pursued the question of who ordered the killings. The Reagan administration continued funding the Salvadoran military. By the time the Civil War ended in 1992, an estimated 75,000 people had been killed. The UN Truth Commission, established as part of the peace process, attributed 85% of the civilian atrocities to government forces and the death squads they ran. Operation Paperclip. The war in Europe ends on May 8, 1945. The Nazi regime collapses. The Nuremberg trials begin their work of accountability. The world declares, with apparent conviction, that what happened under National Socialism, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, the enslavement of millions more, the industrialization of atrocity, can never be permitted again. At roughly the same time, in a dozen cities across Europe, American intelligence officers are visiting German scientists in their homes and their former laboratories with a specific offer. Come to America. We'll give you a new life. We'll overlook certain things about your past. We need what you know. Operation Paperclip. The program would ultimately bring more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians to the United States. Some were genuine technical experts whose contributions to American science were significant and legitimate. Others were something more complicated. The original directive from President Truman in September 1945 explicitly prohibited the employment of ardent Nazis, people who had been more than nominal members of the Nazi Party or who had been implicated in war crimes. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, which ran the program, was tasked with vetting candidates against this standard. They simply falsified the records. JIOA investigators would receive a scientist's background file, which might include SS membership, participation in forced labor programs, knowledge of or involvement in concentration camp experiments, and cleanse it. References to party membership were deleted. References to the use of slave labor were removed. References to war crimes were excised. A new file was created. The scientist arrived in America with a clean record. Werner von Braun, the most famous product of Paperclip and the most instructive case. Von Braun had been the technical director of the German rocket program, the man behind the V-2, which killed thousands of British civilians in the war's final years. He was a member of the SS. The V-2 was built at a factory called Mittelwerk, using slave labor from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp. More than 20,000 people died building the V-2, more than the rockets killed when they hit their targets. Von Braun visited Mittelwerk regularly. He selected workers from the camp. He was present when workers were hanged. He came to America. His SS membership was deleted from his file. He became the director of the Marshall Space Flight Center. He designed the Saturn V rocket that took Americans to the moon. He was lauded as the father of American space exploration. He died in 1977 with a Presidential Medal of Freedom. Arthur Rudolph, the operations director at Mittelwerk, the man who had day-to-day responsibility for the death factory. After the war, he was brought to the United States, worked for NASA, and helped design the Saturn V. He was eventually investigated by the Justice Department's Office of Special Investigations in the 1980s, decades later, and faced with evidence of his activities at Mittelwerk. He renounced his American citizenship and returned to Germany rather than face trial. Kurt Blome, a senior Nazi biological weapons researcher who had conducted experiments on humans at concentration camps. He was acquitted at the Nuremberg doctors' trial due to insufficient evidence, in part because key documents hadn't been gathered. He was then recruited by the Army Chemical Corps to consult on biological weapons research. His former colleagues at the camps had died for the same crimes. The justification for Paperclip was explicit in internal documents. The Soviet Union was also recruiting German scientists, and it was better to have them than to let them go to the Soviets. In the Cold War calculus, keeping Nazi scientists out of Soviet hands was worth overlooking what those scientists had done. This calculation was not unreasonable in purely strategic terms. The Soviet Union did recruit German scientists. Some of them worked on Soviet weapons programs. The early space race was, in significant part, a competition between American Nazis and Soviet Nazis. What is remarkable is not that the decision was made. In the panicked first years of the Cold War, it may have been inevitable, but that it was made in secret by falsifying records, in explicit violation of presidential directive and basic moral principle, and that the men who benefited from it lived out comfortable American lives while the people they had enslaved and murdered were dead and forgotten. Werner von Braun's name is on a middle school in Huntsville, Alabama. There's a crater on the moon named after him. The Downwinders, the Nevada test site, approximately 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Between 1951 and 1962, the United States detonated more than 100 nuclear devices in the atmosphere above this desert. The mushroom clouds were visible from the Las Vegas Strip. Hotels advertised dawn bomb watches. Tourists drove out from the city to see the detonations from hillside vantage points. The Nevada Chamber of Commerce ran advertisements featuring atomic imagery. Vegas Vic, the famous neon cowboy, was repurposed for promotional materials featuring atomic explosions. The atmosphere was, in some respects, surreal, a tourist attraction built around weapons capable of destroying cities. And about 100 miles downwind, in small towns in Nevada and Utah and Arizona, towns with names like St. George, Cedar City, and Parowan, people were living their lives. They were farming, ranching, raising children, growing vegetables. They watched the strange light on the horizon in the mornings. Sometimes the wind brought something, a smell, a fine dust that settled on their cars and their vegetable gardens, and their children playing outside. The government told them it was safe. Officials from the Atomic Energy Commission occasionally drove through in trucks with Geiger counters, taking readings, assuring residents that there was no health risk. This was not true. The AEC knew from its own measurements that radioactive fallout from the Nevada tests was drifting over populated areas at concentrations that exceeded safe exposure levels. Internal documents show that this information was known and suppressed. The AEC's own scientists documented cases where fallout had contaminated food supplies, milk from cows that had grazed on contaminated grass, vegetables grown in contaminated soil. The public rationale for continuing the tests despite these measurements was national security. Above-ground testing was essential for developing the weapons that would deter Soviet aggression, and the risks to downwind communities were an acceptable cost. No one asked the downwind communities whether they accepted those costs. In the decade after the testing began, cancer rates in the affected communities began to rise. Leukemia, which is particularly sensitive to radiation exposure, appeared in clusters in southern Utah that alarmed local physicians. Children who had been outside during the test periods, playing in the dust or drinking milk, developed cancers that their doctors couldn't explain. One physician who treated these patients, Dr. Arlo Clark from Cedar City, testified years later about what he had seen. Children dying of leukemia, while AEC officials told their parents there was nothing to worry about. He had been asking questions since the 1950s. He had been told, repeatedly, that his concerns were unfounded. In 1982, a federal judge named Bruce Jenkins, in a case brought by a group of cancer victims and their families, ruled that the government had been negligent in its test operations and that its negligence had caused cancer in some plaintiffs. It was the first judicial finding of government liability for nuclear testing fallout. The government appealed. The 10th Circuit overturned the ruling on jurisdictional grounds. The Federal Tort Claims Act bars certain suits against the government for discretionary decisions. The cancer victims won nothing. In 1990, Congress passed the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which established a fund to compensate downwinders, uranium miners, and nuclear test workers who developed certain cancers. The standard payment was $50,000. Many of the people who should have received compensation had already died. The program was underfunded, and its qualifying criteria were repeatedly challenged as too narrow. The testing is now known to have caused an estimated 340,000 to 690,000 cancer cases among Americans exposed to fallout. A range of estimates from a study published in JAMA in 1997. The lower-end estimate alone exceeds the total American military deaths in World War II. Mustard gas on soldiers segregated by race. The same logic that governed the downwinders, some people's lives are acceptable collateral damage in the service of national security, appears in a program that is less known but equally damning. During World War II, the United States military tested mustard gas and other chemical agents on approximately 60,000 American soldiers. These weren't accidents. They weren't training exercises gone wrong. They were deliberate experiments designed to measure the effects of chemical weapons on human beings. Soldiers were placed in gas chambers and exposed to mustard gas concentrations. They were left in their contaminated clothing for extended periods to study the effects on skin. They were told they were testing new uniforms or equipment. They were told the experiments were routine. They were told, in some cases, essentially nothing. They followed orders and submitted to what was presented as military procedure. The effects were severe. Mustard gas causes blisters on skin and in lungs, eye damage, and long-term respiratory damage. Soldiers who were heavily exposed suffered for years afterward. Some developed cancer. When they tried to file for VA benefits, they found that their medical records had been classified. They could not prove what had been done to them. Here is where the story becomes even more disturbing. The experiments were segregated by race. Military researchers specifically designed studies to test whether black soldiers and Puerto Rican soldiers would respond differently to mustard gas than white soldiers. This was the explicit scientific rationale, not a byproduct of segregated facilities, but the stated purpose of the experimental design. They wanted to know if race affected chemical weapon vulnerability. The answer, which should surprise no one who understands human biology, was no. There were no meaningful racial differences in mustard gas response. What there was, instead, was a generation of black and Puerto Rican veterans who had been exposed to chemical weapons, specifically because military researchers thought their responses might be interestingly different. This program was not fully documented and publicly disclosed until 2015, when NPR and the Department of Veterans Affairs published an investigation. By then, most of the test subjects were dead. Those still alive were in their 90s. Broken arrows, the lost nuclear weapons. The United States military uses the term broken arrow to describe an accidental event involving nuclear weapons, detonation, contamination, or loss. They officially acknowledge 32 broken arrow incidents. At least 6 of those incidents resulted in nuclear weapons that were never recovered. Let me repeat that. There are nuclear weapons lost by the United States military, currently sitting in the ocean, or buried in farmland, or resting on the floor of foreign coastal waters that no one has retrieved. February 5th, 1958. Savannah, Georgia. A B-47 bomber and an F-86 fighter jet collide during a training exercise over South Carolina. The B-47 is carrying a Mark 15 nuclear bomb, 7,600 pounds, with a yield estimated at 3.8 megatons. That's about 250 times the yield of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. The pilot, fearing the bomb will detonate on a crash landing, releases it over Wassaw Sound near Tybee Island, Georgia. He then lands the damaged plane. The bomb falls into the water. Navy divers conduct an extensive search. They find the impact crater. They do not find the bomb. After 9 weeks, the search is called off. The Mark 15 is somewhere in the mud of Wassaw Sound. It is still there. The Air Force has periodically conducted surveys of the area. The bomb has never been found. January 17, 1966. Palomares, Spain. A B-52 carrying 4 nuclear bombs collides with a KC-135 tanker during an aerial refueling operation. The B-52 breaks up. 3 of the 4 bombs fall onto Spanish farmland near the village of Palomares. The 4th lands in the Mediterranean Sea. The 3 land-based bombs do not detonate, but 2 of them rupture their conventional explosives, scattering plutonium over an area of farmland. The contamination is severe. American personnel conduct an extensive cleanup, removing contaminated soil and shipping it to the United States. Spanish farmers are compensated. Local residents are, at least partially, informed. The 4th bomb took 79 days to find. The U.S. Navy deployed 70 ships and 4 submarines and employed a small submersible called Alvin to conduct an unprecedented deep-water search. They eventually located and recovered the bomb from 2,850 feet of water. The Palomares incident became public almost immediately. It's difficult to hide a plutonium contamination event in a Spanish village. The U.S. and Spain eventually negotiated a cleanup agreement in 2015. The Tybee Island bomb has never been recovered. There are others. A bomb lost off Greenland in 1968 when a B-52 crashed on the ice. 3 of 4 weapons were recovered. The 4th is in Baffin Bay. A bomb lost off the Oregon coast in 1959. The military's official position is that the lost weapons pose minimal radiation risk. This may be true. The safety systems on modern nuclear weapons are designed to prevent detonation in accident scenarios. But minimal radiation risk is not the same as no risk. And the knowledge that several multi-megaton nuclear weapons are sitting in the ocean floor in waters near populated coastlines is not a fact that most Americans are aware of. Edgewood Arsenal and the Soldier Experiments. Fort Detrick's biological weapons program was not the only facility where American soldiers were used as human test subjects for weapons development. Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland was the center of the Army's chemical weapons program. From 1955 to 1975, the Army Chemical Corps ran a program that exposed more than 7,000 American soldiers to chemical and biological agents. These weren't combat exposures or accidental contaminations. They were deliberate experiments. Soldiers were exposed to LSD, PCP, UBZ, a powerful hallucinogen that can incapacitate its victims for days, sarin nerve agent, VX nerve agent, mustard gas, and various other compounds. They were told they were testing new equipment, new protective gear, new uniforms. In some cases, they were told almost nothing. The effects lasted years, sometimes decades. Some soldiers developed cancers. Others suffered neurological damage. Others reported symptoms consistent with chronic chemical exposure, persistent tremors, cognitive decline, memory problems. When they sought treatment, they discovered that their medical records from Edgewood had been classified. They could not prove, to the VA's standard, what had been done to them. They were told their symptoms were unrelated to service, or psychosomatic, or simply unexplained. For 30 years, the veterans of Edgewood Arsenal fought to get their records, get their diagnoses acknowledged, and get treatment. In 2004, the Army finally issued a formal acknowledgement of the Edgewood program. In 2009, Congress passed the Caregivers and Veterans Omnibus Health Services Act, which required the Pentagon to identify and notify veterans who had participated in chemical testing. Many of the subjects, by then, were already dead. James Ketchum, the Army doctor who ran many of the Edgewood experiments and wrote a book about them in 2006, maintains that the research was valuable and that the soldiers were treated humanely. He is one of the few people involved who has spoken extensively on the record about what happened there. The soldiers themselves, those still alive, mostly disagree with his characterization. The Architecture of Torture. September 17, 2001. 6 days after the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, President Bush signs a classified directive authorizing the CIA to capture and detain terrorist suspects in secret facilities that would come to be known as black sites. Over the next several years, the CIA would establish a network of black sites in at least 8 countries: Thailand, Poland, Romania, Lithuania, Morocco, Afghanistan, and others whose identities remain classified. The sites were operated in partnership with host countries, governments that agreed, sometimes for significant payments, to allow CIA detention and interrogation operations on their territory. At these sites, approximately 119 individuals were detained. At least 39 were subjected to what the CIA called enhanced interrogation techniques. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence's 2014 report, after a 5-year investigation, produced a 6,700-page document describing these techniques in detail. The 525-page executive summary that was declassified and released provides the most comprehensive documented account of what happened. The techniques included waterboarding, administered to 3 detainees a combined total of at least 83 to 183 documented times, sleep deprivation for up to 180 hours, more than 7 days, while shackled in standing positions, confinement in boxes, prolonged nudity, dietary manipulation, facial and abdominal slapping, walling, slamming detainees into specially constructed walls designed to make a loud noise without causing injury, though injuries occurred, rectal feeding, and rehydration. The committee's report concluded that the torture program was more brutal than the CIA had represented to Congress or the White House, ineffective in producing intelligence that prevented attacks, and the product of a program that had been expanded without adequate oversight or legal review. On the question of effectiveness, the most commonly offered justification, the report is unsparing. It concluded that no intelligence of unique value was produced under EIT that could not have been obtained through other means, and that in several high-profile cases, CIA officials had falsely claimed that intelligence derived from torture was responsible for specific operational successes, including the capture of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the identification of the courier that led to Osama bin Laden. But perhaps the most disturbing section of the report deals with individual cases. Gul Rahman was an Afghan who was detained by the CIA and brought to a black site in Afghanistan called the Salt Pit. He had no known connections to Al-Qaeda. He was subjected to harsh interrogation. In November 2002, after a CIA officer ordered him stripped and left chained to the concrete floor of his cell overnight, he died of hypothermia. His body was buried in an unmarked grave. His family was never officially notified of his death or its circumstances. The CIA officer responsible for his treatment received a performance award shortly after Rahman's death and was later promoted. Abu Zubaydah, one of the first high-value detainees, and one of the 3 individuals who were waterboarded. He was waterboarded 83 times. He was subjected to sleep deprivation for multiple extended periods. He was confined in boxes. CIA officers later acknowledged in internal documents that the intelligence produced from his interrogation was of questionable value, and that many of the facts he provided under torture proved unreliable or could not be corroborated. He was never charged with a crime. He remains detained without charge at Guantanamo Bay as of this writing. His request for a court hearing to present evidence about what was done to him has been blocked by the government's assertion that his treatment is classified and that revealing details about his detention would harm national security. He cannot speak about what was done to him because what was done to him is a state secret. No CIA officer was prosecuted for the torture program. The Obama administration, which ended the program in one of its first acts and released the OLC memos authorizing it, declined to pursue criminal charges on the grounds that the officials involved had relied in good faith on legal guidance they'd been given. This reasoning, you can't prosecute someone who was following orders if the orders came with a legal opinion attached, is one that the United States had explicitly rejected at Nuremberg. The fake vaccination program and its children, Abbottabad, Pakistan, 2011. The CIA's intelligence has narrowed the location of Osama bin Laden to a compound in a residential neighborhood in this northern Pakistani city. They have satellite imagery. They have human intelligence. But what they don't have is definitive confirmation that bin Laden is present. Someone in the CIA has an idea. A Pakistani physician named Shakil Afridi is recruited to run a hepatitis B vaccination campaign in Abbottabad. The campaign is genuine. At least some doses of real hepatitis vaccine are administered, but its real purpose is to collect blood samples from children in the neighborhood around the compound. If those samples match DNA profiles of bin Laden's family that the CIA has in its database, that's confirmation. The vaccination campaign is partially run. DNA samples are collected. It's not entirely clear whether they produce the confirmation the CIA was seeking. Accounts vary. The bin Laden raid proceeds in May 2011 and succeeds, and then the operation is exposed. A Pakistani intelligence official, apparently connected to the ISI, identifies Shakil Afridi to Pakistani authorities. Afridi is arrested. He is tried and convicted under Pakistani law, though the conviction was later overturned on procedural grounds, and his legal situation has since become highly complex. He has been held in Pakistan for years. The exposure of the fake vaccination program causes immediate and catastrophic damage to public health in the region. The Taliban, which has long claimed that Western vaccination campaigns are intelligence operations designed to harm Muslims or collect information, uses the Abbottabad operation as proof. They announce that they will kill vaccination workers. They begin doing so. Between 2012 and 2015, more than 70 vaccination workers are murdered in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Mostly young women doing community health work, going door to door in dangerous areas to give children shots that will protect them from polio. Pakistan becomes one of only 2 countries in the world where polio remains endemic. The reason polio hasn't been eradicated from Pakistan, the reason children are still being paralyzed by a disease that is preventable, is, in significant and documented part, because an intelligence operation destroyed trust in vaccination campaigns. The CIA issued a policy statement in 2014 saying it would no longer use vaccination programs as cover for intelligence operations. Health organizations and critics noted that this statement did nothing to rebuild the trust that had been destroyed and did nothing for the children who were being paralyzed by a preventable disease because adults with security clearances had decided that an intelligence advantage was worth more than a functioning public health infrastructure. The Price of Truth. The Whistleblowers. Every story we've told in this documentary is public because someone broke the rules to tell it. That is not a casual observation. It is a structural fact about how information flows in a national security state. The government classifies secrets not just to protect genuine security interests, but to avoid embarrassment, avoid accountability, and avoid the legal and political consequences of what it has done. The only consistent mechanism by which those secrets reach the public is individual human beings who decide that the truth matters more than their safety. Let's talk about what happens to those people. Daniel Ellsberg. In 1971, Ellsberg, a former Marine officer and Rand Corporation analyst, leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times and Washington Post. The Pentagon Papers were a classified Defense Department study of U.S. decision-making in Vietnam. They showed that the government had consistently misled Congress and the public about the war's prospects and about the basis for key decisions, including the Gulf of Tonkin. The Nixon administration attempted to prevent publication through a prior restraint order. The first time in American history, the government had attempted to prevent newspapers from publishing classified material. The Supreme Court rejected the attempt in a landmark press freedom case. Ellsberg was charged under the Espionage Act and faced up to 115 years in prison. His trial collapsed when it emerged that the Nixon administration had burglarized his psychiatrist's office looking for damaging personal information, an illegal operation that also involved some of the same operatives who would later be involved in the Watergate break-in. Ellsberg died in June 2023 at the age of 92. He spent the last 50 years of his life as an anti-war activist and whistleblower advocate. When he leaked the Pentagon Papers, he expected to spend the rest of his life in prison. He had made peace with that possibility. "I thought it was worth it," he said, near the end of his life. Gary Webb. In 1996, the San Jose Mercury News published Webb's three-part series, Dark Alliance, which documented connections between the CIA-backed Nicaraguan Contras and the crack cocaine epidemic in Los Angeles. The series was accompanied by an interactive website, one of the earliest major digital journalism projects, and spread rapidly. It was a sensation. The CIA and major American newspapers responded with a coordinated attack. The New York Times, Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times all published prominent pieces criticizing Webb's methodology and conclusions. The San Jose Mercury News, under pressure, published an editorial distancing itself from its own story. Webb was forced out. He was devastated. He had done the journalism. He had the documents, and he had been destroyed for doing his job. Then, in 1998, the CIA's own Inspector General released a report that confirmed significant portions of Webb's reporting. The agency had known about Contra drug trafficking and had looked the other way. Webb had been right. He wasn't alive to see the full vindication. Gary Webb died on December 10, 2004, from 2 gunshot wounds to the head. The Sacramento coroner ruled it a suicide. Supporters and some journalists have questioned the ruling. The forensic pathologist who examined the wounds noted that dying from a self-inflicted second shot to the head is medically unusual, though not impossible. Whether his death was a suicide or something else is something we cannot establish from the available evidence. What we can establish is that he was a journalist who told the truth about CIA involvement in drug trafficking, was professionally destroyed for it, and died in circumstances that remain, at minimum, unusual. Edward Snowden. In June 2013, Snowden, a former CIA technical officer and NSA contractor, provided The Guardian and Washington Post with a large cache of classified NSA documents. The documents established beyond any reasonable dispute that the NSA was conducting mass surveillance of American citizens, collecting the phone records of virtually every American, accessing Internet company servers through a program called PRISM, and conducting surveillance that went far beyond what any public official had acknowledged or what most legal experts believed was authorized. The Obama administration charged Snowden with espionage and theft of government property. Snowden, who had left the United States before the publication of the first story and was en route to Latin America via Moscow when his passport was revoked, became stranded in Russia. He was granted asylum by the Russian government, where he remains. The response to Snowden's leaks was mixed in ways that reveal something important. Several federal courts and a review board commissioned by President Obama himself found that the NSA's bulk phone records collection program was illegal. Congress passed the USA Freedom Act in 2015, which modified but did not eliminate mass surveillance programs. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which had been secretly authorizing programs that its own judges later described as beyond the court's legal authority, was subjected to mild reform. Snowden has not been pardoned. He applied for Russian citizenship and received it in 2022. He has said he would return to the United States to face trial if he could be guaranteed a fair process, including the ability to present a public interest defense to the jury. The government has refused to commit to these conditions. Julian Assange spent 11 years in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and several more in Belmarsh prison before reaching a plea agreement with the U.S. government in 2024. The terms of his case established a precedent that has alarmed press freedom organizations, that publishing classified information can constitute espionage even when that information is provided by a source rather than stolen by the publisher. Chelsea Manning was convicted of multiple charges under the Espionage Act for leaking documents to WikiLeaks, including the collateral murder video, footage of a 2007 U.S. military helicopter attack in Baghdad that killed 12 people, including 2 Reuters journalists. Manning was sentenced to 35 years in prison. President Obama commuted the sentence in 2017 after Manning had served 7 years. The collateral murder video, which showed military personnel laughing as they fired on civilians who had gathered to help the wounded, was one of the most significant pieces of journalism to emerge from the Iraq War. Manning was imprisoned for providing it to the public. Here is what the pattern reveals. The government classifies what is embarrassing as well as what is genuinely sensitive. The legal framework for whistleblowing is designed to prosecute rather than protect. The people who break the rules to tell the truth face prison, or exile, or destruction. And the people who did the things the whistleblowers revealed, the torturers, the illegal surveyors, the fabricators of WMD intelligence, face almost nothing. Thomas Drake, an NSA whistleblower who attempted to report surveillance overreach through official channels before going to a journalist, was indicted under the Espionage Act. The government's case collapsed when it became clear that they had overclassified the evidence, that the documents they claimed were secrets were actually not classified. Drake's career was destroyed. He now works at an Apple store. The official who ordered the illegal surveillance program Drake tried to report was awarded the National Security Medal. The black sites and what we still don't know. The Senate torture report runs 6,700 pages. The public version is 525 pages. The classified version, as of this writing, remains classified. There are 6,175 pages that the American public has not seen. Why? The official answer is that releasing them would compromise national security, reveal sources and methods, endanger ongoing operations, create risks for individuals whose cooperation was obtained in confidence. The unofficial answer which many of the senators and staff who participated in the investigation have suggested in interviews, is that the full report contains information that is more damaging to more institutions than the summary suggests, that the torture program was more extensive, involved more people, and produced more systematic abuses than the 525-page summary conveys. We don't know what's in those 6,175 pages. We may never know. This is the modern shape of the problem we've been examining throughout this documentary. Not just that terrible things were done, though they were, but that the mechanisms for keeping them secret have become more sophisticated, more institutionalized, more resilient. The government classifies roughly 50 million documents per year. This is not because 50 million documents contain genuine national security secrets. Most of them don't. It is because the default posture of the national security state is secrecy, and classification is the primary tool for maintaining it. The Freedom of Information Act, passed in 1966, established a right of public access to government documents. It has produced extraordinary journalism and historical research. It has also been systematically evaded, undermined, and delayed by agencies that treat transparency as a threat rather than an obligation. The average processing time for a complex FOIA request to a major agency is measured in years, not months. Some requesters have waited decades. The Pentagon Papers were leaked in 1971. Their full historical significance was not appreciated until the classified portions were finally released in 2011, 40 years later, when most of the people involved were dead. The JFK assassination records from 1963 are still not fully declassified more than 60 years later. Every administration that has reviewed the question has found reasons to maintain some portion of the secrecy. The reasons given are always national security. The actual reasons, what specifically, in a 60-year-old murder investigation, requires classification today, are not explained. The MKUltra records were mostly destroyed in 1973. What we know about the program comes from the 10% that survived, and from the congressional testimony of people who participated in it. We will never know the full scope of what was done. The torture report's full 6,700 pages sit in a classified archive. Project Sunshine and the Stolen Bones. There is one more story we need to tell before we close. It belongs alongside the radiation experiments and the Tuskegee study and Fernald, in the category of things so extreme that they seem, at first encounter, impossible to believe. But they happened, they're documented, they're real. In 1953, the Atomic Energy Commission faced a specific scientific problem. They needed to measure how strontium-90, a radioactive isotope produced by nuclear weapons testing that accumulates in bones, was spreading through the population. They needed bone samples, many bone samples. Strontium-90 accumulates most heavily in the bones of the young, because young bones absorb calcium most actively, and strontium mimics calcium in the body. So they needed the bones of young people, of children, ideally of babies. The solution they developed was to collect body parts from autopsies without asking permission. This program, known as Project Sunshine, operated from the mid-1950s through the mid-1960s. It was international. Samples were collected in Australia, the United Kingdom, South America, Hong Kong, and other countries, as well as throughout the United States. The AEC estimated they needed 1,500 samples to produce statistically valid data. They collected more than that. The samples were collected during routine autopsies, legs, ribs, vertebrae. In some cases, researchers took entire spines. The bones were sent to AEC laboratories for strontium analysis. Parents were not told. They buried empty caskets, or caskets that had been altered. They grieved over bodies that were missing pieces. They had no idea. One AEC official, discussing the program in a 1955 document that was later declassified, wrote that the program needed to be conducted on a clandestine basis because of concerns about public reaction. He was right that the public would react badly. He apparently did not consider whether the public's reaction might be based in justifiable moral outrage. Project Sunshine was exposed in the 1990s as part of a broader Department of Energy investigation into radiation experiments. Governments in Australia, the UK, and the US acknowledged the program and issued apologies. The families whose children's bones had been taken received the apologies. They could not receive back what had been taken from them. One mother, interviewed after the revelations, said she had always felt something was wrong when her son was returned to her after the autopsy. She had always wondered. Now she knew. Now she had the knowledge and could do nothing with it. That is the shape of accountability in this system. The knowledge comes, eventually, 50 years late, 30 years late, sometimes only after everyone directly responsible is dead. The knowledge comes. The accountability almost never does. We've traveled a long way tonight, from Macon County in 1932 to a CIA black site in the 2000s, from the Nevada test site to the floor of the Mediterranean Sea, from a letter in J. Edgar Hoover's drawer to the servers of global tech companies, from Nazi scientists in American classrooms to whistleblowers in foreign exile. 101 documented facts, 10 chapters, 100 years of shadow history. I want to be careful about what I'm asking you to take away from this. I'm not asking you to conclude that the government is monolithic, that every official is corrupt, that there is a single controlling conspiracy behind all of these events. The truth is messier and in some ways more disturbing than that. These programs were run by human beings who had convinced themselves, usually sincerely, that what they were doing was justified, that the communist threat was real enough to justify MKUltra, that winning the space race was worth overlooking what happened at Mittelwerk, that gathering data on how radiation moved through the body was worth what they did to the women of Macon County and the boys of Fernald. The through line isn't malice, though malice was present. The through line is the decision that some people's lives are worth less than the goal being pursued, that the truth can be withheld from the public when officials judge that the public's access to truth is inconvenient, that accountability can be deferred indefinitely, and that the people with the power to defer it will do so. That's the lesson. That's the thing that connects 1932 Alabama to 2003 New York City to 2011 Abbottabad. The systems that produced these abuses are still running. Some have been reformed, meaningfully reformed. The Church Committee investigations of the 1970s produced genuine legislative constraints on surveillance and domestic operations that lasted for decades. The post-Abu Ghraib scandals produced genuine reforms in military detention policy. The 1974 Privacy Act, the 1978 FISA statute, the Inspector General systems, the Congressional Oversight Committees. These are real, and they do real work. But they operate within a system that still defaults to secrecy, that still treats transparency as a threat, that still prosecutes the people who reveal its secrets and protects the people who created them, that still classifies 50 million documents a year. That still has 6,175 pages of a torture report that the public has never seen. The people who told us these stories, Ellsberg, Webb, Snowden, Manning, Drake, the whistleblowers whose names we don't know because they worked inside the system and were never publicly identified, paid enormous prices for what they did. They lost careers, freedom, safety, health. Some of them lost everything. They did it anyway, because they believed that we, had a right to know what was being done in our name, that the compact of democratic governance requires an informed public, and that a government that systematically deceives its citizens about its own conduct is not governing them. It is ruling them. We know what we know because they paid what they paid. The question is what we do with the knowing. Vigilance is not cynicism. Knowing these stories is not the same as concluding that nothing can be trusted, that all institutions are corrupt, that the only rational response is contempt and withdrawal. That conclusion would be, in a sense, the final victory of the systems we've been examining, because a public that withdraws from democratic engagement is a public that can no longer serve as a check on power. The knowledge is supposed to make you engaged. Angry, yes, but engaged. It's supposed to make you vote and pay attention and read the primary sources when they're declassified and support the journalists who are doing this work right now. Because there are things happening right now, things with classifications on them that won't be removed for decades, that will produce documentaries like this one in 2060 and 2070 and 2080. Unless the people paying attention now prevent them. That's the bet. That's always been the bet. Knowledge is power, and the first fact about power is that it requires vigilance to survive. Sleep tight.